In the emergency department, frustration is often the spark for invention. A device that fails, a workflow that slows you down, a problem that no one has solved. Today, we explore how biodesign helps physicians turn that spark into something tangible, moving from bedside insight to real-world impact. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Stanford Emergency Medicine Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Matthew Strelo, Vice Chair of the Department of Emergency Medicine at Stanford. Today, I'm joined by Dr. Andra Blomkalns, Professor and Chair of Emergency Medicine at Stanford. Dr. Blomkalns is a strong advocate for emergency physicians as leaders in innovation, not only within the ED, but in shaping and transforming healthcare across the broader system. She's a former biodesign faculty fellow, holds an MBA in innovation and entrepreneurship, and has served on intellectual property and technology development advisory committees. You may know her as a past president of the Society for Academic Emergency Medicine. Dr. Blomkalns, Andra, welcome.
Thank you so much, Matt. Happy to be here.
So before we get started, I think people that know you know that you're an outdoor enthusiast, a lover of animals, and an avid fly fisherman. Tell us, what is the go-to place that you went to recently for fly fishing?
Oh, I don't know if there's really a go-to place, but I had a great trip with my dad on the Snake River not too long ago for cutthroat, and we had a lovely time, caught some beautiful fish, released all of them happily, and it was a really memorable trip. So I'm eager to go back when I can.
That sounds lovely, and I've always wanted to go to the Snake River. I grew up in the Northwest, so that's one of my go-to places that I haven't actually been. Let's dive in. Stanford has this world-famous design school and the Musselman Design Center. Tell us, what is design thinking?
Design thinking is a deliberate, step-by-step path whereby a problem can be identified through much observation, and then there's a step-by-step path by which to evaluate potential solutions, different facets of those solutions, and then ultimately working towards a product that may be feasible, evaluating that product within the marketplace as an investment, and how it can work better and make patients' lives better. It's really the key about biodesign is it's a process. It's not just a thing. It's a process by which many ideas can be evaluated and then brought through almost a standard curriculum to hopeful success.
So with that framing for design thinking as being a process, how would you explain biodesign then, to the busy emergency medicine physician on shift?
Well, you said before, I'm a big proponent for emergency physicians. And one of those things is because emergency medicine is such a unique field in that it's the only place that's truly unscripted in medicine. There's no plan. Any individual emergency physician walks into their shift and has no idea what they're going to be faced, and then has to rather quickly draw upon their knowledge and experience to move forward and find the best opportunity and the best outcomes for their patients, which I think is a perfect place for biodesign. So if biodesign can have an environment where I think it'll flourish, it would be in the emergency department. But for an individual emergency physician, like you mentioned, it is that feeling when you don't have exactly what you need, or there's not a piece of equipment, or there's not an approach, or the patient's not in the right condition for what you need to do something optimally. And that's where that spark can come from of what could be a great idea.
So this core principle, biodesign, is identifying needs, right? And then through engagement with healthcare practitioners. This obviously resonates really deeply with you. Was there a specific moment for you in the ED where you saw a problem and thought, that is exactly what biodesign is meant to solve?
Well, there's a moment when I thought about this, and I didn't have the wherewithal to understand it was biodesign at the time. And that is, and it's okay if I tell a couple stories, right?
Tell away.
Excellent. So there was once, as tends to happen from time to time, that we have foreign bodies in various orifices that we need to get things out of. And we had a gentleman with a sewing pin, or a sewing needle, excuse me, a sewing needle in an uncomfortable location. And sure, the patient could have been scheduled to go to the OR. However, it's middle of the night on a Saturday night. It's unlikely that that will happen. The needle definitely needs to come out. It's very painful. It's in a bad position. And then, as a resident and one of my senior resident, we concocted the idea of, well, I have these rare earth magnets in my backpack, and let's see what we can do about it. And it was just so exciting. It didn't take very long. It was just a few minutes. And so we shoved like 6 of these guys. They were about the size of like an eraser head or a little bit smaller, into a piece of like the thick part of the nasal cannula tubing, and aligned it with the sewing needle. And it perfectly aligned and smacked up against the side of the sewing needle. And we were able to withdraw the sewing needle without any internal damage or anything. And it got me thinking about innovating and design and so forth. And I started doing some research in it. And then I read an article that said the 2 most prolific inventors in terms of the style of person or type of person are fishermen and physicians. And I thought to myself, I'm both. This is fantastic. I can do this. And it got me thinking, like, how do you go about doing this? Now, I understand that magnets in a piece of tubing are not going to be the next best invention for mankind and won't solve major diseases. However, it just got me thinking that emergency physicians often have their brain in this place where they have to think outside the box, so to speak, and that we're in a great place to move forward innovation if we just put our minds to it.
That probably was an amazing invention, though, for the individual who needed that needle out of whatever orifice it was in.
He was pretty pleased.
He was pretty pleased, yeah. Yes. And I'm sure that the resident that was running around with rare earth magnets finally was like, I did it. I found a use for them.
Yes.
Otherwise, I'm not sure why they were in the backpack.
They're cool.
That was a lovely example of sort of a complex, sort of a simple, invention to solve a problem. I think oftentimes a lot of things that we see in the emergency department seem simple, especially to outside observers. But when you dig into them, they're quite complex. The processes around them and all of the actual needs of an individual patient can be quite complex. What's an example of a need in emergency medicine that sounds simple or obvious, but when you unpack it through the biodesign process, it turns out to be quite complex or challenging?
So every single medical condition or every single presentation has so many factors around it. And it's part of the biodesign thinking to really get to each of those factors. And the real biodesign process is actually non-clinicians who observe very intentionally in different environments and develop a list of potentially hundreds of needs, and I did say hundreds, and then chisel through them by criteria of what the market looks like. Are there other alternatives? Is there a pathway for it to be reimbursed? Is there already intellectual property in this area? What would be different about this one? And it's a very staged and methodical process whereby finding the best need is really the most important item. So one example might be that we know that in our long-term care facilities that decubitus ulcers are common and very difficult to manage. And there have been several companies and several inventors who've been trying to figure out how to help people with that condition. And there are a number of devices and lotions and creams and wound care devices that help that, but no one's been able to solve that problem. And the problem is because people have to be recumbent, and people have to be recumbent in the bed, and that causes undue pressure on certain locations. And no matter what you do, humans weren't made to be recumbent. We're bipedal upright animals, that being recumbent too long causes significant problems. And there are some things we'll just never get around. But that's just one example where there's a lot of work in that area and with variable success.
It is a great example. I know that we spend a huge amount of time and energy in the emergency department, especially our nursing staff, looking for decubitus ulcers, documenting them, making sure, because you can get fined, I think, from the federal government and all kinds of other things if you haven't done a good job managing wounds during your hospital admission. And it seems like a totally solvable problem, but yet we know it's causing massive morbidity, even mortality and cost. With that frame that we have a problem here in front of us that we should be able to solve, and everybody's been trying to solve it, like you said, I think that brings up the conversation around failure in biodesign and the way that failure is managed or thought of in biodesign that might be different than the way that physicians typically think about failure. It took me decades to accept that failure is part of growth and definitely part of innovation, and to become more comfortable with failure. We live in Silicon Valley, and Silicon Valley is all about fail fast, fail forward. But in emergency medicine, failure feels personal, and it's really high stakes for us. We think of failure often as directly like causing or leading to the death of an individual or our patient. Do you think medicine, and especially emergency medicine, is uncomfortable with failure? And does that hold us back in the innovation space?
Oh, absolutely. And I think that's where biodesign really comes into play, because it takes the idea or the ideas out of that high-pressure environment. And yes, you're absolutely right. Particularly as emergency physicians, we're conditioned to think of a solution fast, execute, pivot if we need to, and keep going. But the biodesign process helps you take it out of that context, and you're no longer on shift, and there aren't patients' lives directly associated with your idea, and chisel through how different facets or different ideas, and often people pivot to different ideas, and how to look at that problem is much more complex, and you can take the time to think of 100 ideas to solve that problem, and then slowly and deliberately weed through them to find the very best ones. But you're absolutely right, particularly for emergency physicians, that's the one huge, I would say, honest weakness, is that we have to take our brains out of that scope and turn it into a on-paper problem and not a visceral person problem.
Can you share an example where you were trying to solve a problem or invent or innovate in an area and you had a failure? Just to make us all more comfortable with the concept that even you fail.
Yeah, several thousand. So, yeah.
All right. Any specific one you want to share?
Sure. And I think it's where I like to make mistakes and then help other people not make the same mistakes I did. So I'll share a story where, I thought of a need or thought there was a need. And this is where I will tell you the end in the beginning is you get so fixated that's the best possible thing ever that you won't listen to anybody else. And that is so damaging. So for some reason, I thought it looked weird that when we were accessing IVs, that we were trying to put a straight thing into a straight thing at an angle, and that doesn't make any sense, and frequently you go through the IV in the back, or through the vein in the back. So, well, why don't we make an IV that's curved? And the certain sign of ultimate failure is when you start naming the thing before you've even created it. So I called it the curvy, not the IV, the curvy. And I thought if it could be a curved manifestation that could just glide into the vein and then deploy the IV catheter, that would be so much less damaging and so forth. And I spent so much time and tortured several biomedical engineering graduate students into trying to make this curvy. And in the end, I laugh at myself because in the end, it didn't pass the so what test. Like, so what if there's a curved IV that's slightly better? You have millions of IVs being placed every day, and most all of them do okay. And is there really a need? And it goes back to need. Is there really a need to have a slightly better one? And the answer is probably not. But I see this happen a lot when I'm at different conferences and so forth, where you talk to different small startup companies where they have invested so much energy in something, this one single thing, and they're banking on this one single thing. And that one single thing might not work. And when it goes further in the process, and often way past the desired time when you would hope to fail, learn that the device fails, and then have to dissolve like an entire company potentially. And that's where, once again, biodesign helps. You go through all that failing up front. So when there is finally a product, an idea, a device that has been vetted in multiple different ways, so it stands the best chance of success.
It's a great example. I had worked with the biodesign group when they started Stanford India Biodesign a number of years ago. It was their first round. They brought these amazing individuals from across India, engineers from the top engineering school, professors, a business person, physician, and they spent a lot of time actually embedded in the emergency department, embedded on ambulances in India. And at the end of the day, they came up with a number of different ideas. And I remember very explicitly sitting in a hotel room and evaluating one of their ideas, which was like a immobilizer that was plastic for broken limbs in the pre-hospital environment. And I kind of had this like cardboard works, right? And moment. And I'm like, okay, but we'll test it out. And we tested it out, put it on ambulances. It broke a few times. The EMTs didn't like it, and ultimately, it didn't pass the muster of the so what. Were we going to replace, a cardboard box with this much more complicated, more expensive thing for a minimal improvement in performance? But I think that's one of the things that most physicians are really uncomfortable with about the biodesign process, or unaware of, which is this idea that you've taken it to this kind of prototype stage, but that the whole time you're also looking at the business side, the policy side, and all of the other aspects of it, where is someone going to pay for it? Is there incremental benefit that is substantial enough that funders and payers are going to respond? And that is an uncomfortable place for most of us as physicians, and I think that's why this multidisciplinary approach, where a lot of the people on the team are not physicians, is really important. Well, let's move from the concept of failure to how do you get started. If someone came to you and said, like, hey, I want to start thinking in a biodesign way on my next shift, what would you tell them to do differently?
I would say when you see that frustration or that thing you don't have or you wish that you wanted for the patient, in a broad spectrum, either before the patient got there, while the patient is there in the emergency department, or even afterwards, what potential things, plural things, might help in this situation? And try not to just think, oh, this would solve all the problems. And I mentioned before that for emergency physicians, they latch onto one idea way too early. But I would say it'd be something like keeping a digital notebook or so forth of needs. It all starts with needs. What is the need that you're identifying for that patient or for that condition that still has yet to be met? And cultivate thinking of different needs first before thinking of solutions.
Thinking of needs, and I know that in the biodesign program that you're a part of, and you tell people they have to come up with at least X number or some number of needs. Give us a rough estimate. What do you tell people, like, this is how many needs you should start before you really start digging into other things?
Well, the course and the curriculum will tell you hundreds.
That's a lot of needs.
It's a lot of needs, but it's important. And because there are a lot of needs in medicine, it shouldn't be a surprise that even non-medical people can watch in an emergency department for a few days and come up with hundreds of potential needs based on their observation. But that is the thing that sets you free to sort of not hone in too quickly on one specific idea. It's recognizing that there are needs all over the place. And how can we try to methodically work towards addressing some of them?
All right, you've provided this advice to residents, faculty, people in the past, and I'm sure you will going forward. They've identified hundreds of needs, and they've really picked on a couple of them that they want to pursue, or even just one that they want to pursue. What do you tell them to do in the next couple months to get started?
I would say, in addition to evaluating the different features that you said, is get opinions from other people all along the process. The patient, the nurse, the tech, the patient's care provider, patient's primary care physician. Get feedback throughout the spectrum of a patient's care rather than for that one specific problem. And in emergency medicine, we love to solve problems and we go towards a very specific problem. But how does this fit within the context of everything? If it's a great home use tool. It won't work if the care provider can't use it or can't utilize it. And it could be a great patient care level tool, but won't work, as you said, the EMTs didn't like whatever the invention was, or the nurses don't like it. Talk to the people who'd be involved with that device.
Is there something that helps people move to activation? I think a lot of us walk off shift or are on shift and we see these needs, we have ideas, maybe we're writing them down as you suggested, but most of us never take it from the idea stage, through this process to the implementation stage. Is there something that you've seen as a differentiator between the people that just think about the challenges and ideate solutions and those that actually carry those solutions potentially forward into something that achieves impact or change?
So I think it's two things. And the first one's not going to surprise you. It's that fire in the belly. It's the notion that I can impact healthcare. I can impact disease, and I can make it better. And the second thing is patience and discipline in combination. To be able to say, I'm going to look very carefully at this from several different angles, and physicians are impatient, but I'm going to look carefully at this from several different angles and try to work towards the best solution. And people seldom want to take, or physicians seldom want to take that time, because they very often, so often, and I'd say 90+% of the time, go straight toward the solution that they think is going to work. And it's really hard to step back from it. And what I keep trying to tell people again and again is you have to step back from it. And the fear of stepping back from it is you may very well find out that your idea is not going to work, but that's okay. You have the capacity to develop other ideas. And what you said earlier on failure is now resonating with me a little bit. Failure seems like a waste of time, and physicians don't have a lot of time. But unless that time is invested in that very precise thought experiment happens, you won't find something that is potentially a good thing for patient care.
That idea that we have to try 1,000 different ways to actually make a light bulb, and each attempt is moving us forward.
Right, exactly.
Biodesign is something that you preach on a daily basis. It's something like deeply ingrained in the Stanford culture. It's one of the reasons I'm sure you chose to come here. If biodesign and the biodesign process are successful in being integrated into emergency medicine, tell us a little bit about how you think the emergency department of tomorrow, 10 years from today, I should say, will look differently than the emergency department of today that we're all practicing in.
I'm going to try to answer your question, and if I am understanding it correctly, you're saying if emergency medicine embodies the biodesign thinking, that it has the potential to change emergency medicine in the future.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's great, because I agree. And I agree specifically, not just the emergency department, but overall the ecosystem of medicine. Because, once again, I'll go back to emergency physicians are in that unique situation to have to think broadly and also think quickly and also think in a very solution-oriented fashion. So the more physicians that are familiar with this concept, that understand the rigor and the discipline it takes to go through that concept for an idea, the better. I think there are so many incredible different ways that we can make lives better for patients. And as we move to a realm where more patients are going to be taken care of on an outpatient basis, less time in the hospital, less time staying after procedures, and more going home or going to another location, that area in and of itself is just completely open, wide open for innovation.
Is there a textbook or a book or an article or a podcast you follow or something where somebody who's interested in this and isn't at Stanford, where it's kind of all over the place, where they can get started?
Well, there is a textbook. There is a biodesign textbook that's been recently updated and available that goes through the entire process. And there are also different programs through biodesign that allow for that process to be learned in a variety of different formats. And they have several different length programs and several different approaches depending on the professional nature of that individual. I think, first of all, it would be reading, quite frankly, going to the website and just seeing if that concept makes sense to you. And it doesn't make sense for a lot of people because a lot of people don't, well, once again, hone in on their idea and don't want to go through the discipline of doing it. But I really believe in it, and you can certainly look on the list of biodesign devices that have happened over time, some really incredible devices of all types. And I don't want to name any specifically because they're all wonderful, and realize that the process works. The process works really well, and there have been a number of companies, number of devices that have gone off to be successful companies or purchased or gone public that have really impacted patient care. So there is a way to make this happen.
All right, Andra, what is the sacred cow in emergency medicine? Something that is long overdue for redesign.
Well, I'll say the sheer area or the area of patient care that happens for which we usually admit people overnight or less than a couple days, and whether that's IV antibiotics or additional imaging, observation, or otherwise, how much of that can we tackle in a different environment? At home, in a hotel, in an apartment, or something that does not cost as much money as the hospital and also makes the patient feel much more comfortable. And there's so much a push towards that across all different specialties. I think emergency medicine is uniquely poised to think about, okay, we always think about, does this patient need to be admitted or go home? And if they go home, what do they need to go home? And that's the space that I think is perfect. What does this patient need to go home and get better at home? And that's where I think emergency physicians can really focus.
That's that moment that's probably the biggest decision in healthcare, at least from an expense standpoint. Do they go home or do they get admitted? And you're saying the redesign is, let's find that middle ground somewhere where they have this hospital at home or some other services at home that keep them from admission. I agree, people are trying to tackle that, but there's tremendous opportunity, obviously, in that space.
Absolutely.
You are out there preaching biodesign thinking, biodesign process, and we are having people in our area and in your networks take up this mantle. Should this be done more broadly? Should every EM resident be trained in the needs-finding process?
Well, you're certainly taking on a bias of mine, and I would say yes, because I also think that it helps even the real-time care of patients, the process of thinking and evaluating ideas in a methodical fashion. We'll have to talk to the ACGME about what they'd like to see in their curriculum, but for now we'll certainly keep that in mind and active for our residents here at Stanford.
I'm sure there's many people that want to talk to the ACGME right now, so
yes.
We'll just get in line for that. Have we unintentionally convinced EM clinicians and EM practitioners that innovation is someone else's job?
Well, I don't think so, because who would have told them that? But it's also, no one has come out and said to emergency medicine broadly or emergency medicine trainees broadly that it's your role to make an impact in your career on healthcare. That yes, you will take care of hundreds, thousands of patients, but what is your legacy and what do you leave behind afterwards, whether it's in knowledge creation or scholarly activity or a new device that helps patients with their illness or with their acute condition that would be so valuable. And people just don't know where to get started. And I hope the conversation we've had today helps with the notion of there is a place to get started. There are ways to think about this. You don't have to be a natural inventor and know exactly where to go and figure out if the IP is correct or if you need a patent or a license or all those things. There are resources, and biodesign is not the only resource. There are other resources, but there are resources for physician inventors, specifically physician inventors, that you can tap into to help along with this process.
I really appreciate you coming and talking to us about structured innovation and biodesign. Mm-hmm. We like to end on a lighter note, though.
Okay.
And I know you have probably more pets than I could count.
Only three.
Only three.
Okay.
But you probably have some adopted ones that you don't fully claim. I'm not sure. But you have 3 pets. I was wondering, what is it you want to design for or have designed for one of your pets or animals?
Oh, that's a lovely, lovely question. Right off the top of my head, I can think of like 3, but I'll just give you one. And one is, it would be so great that, well, cutting the nails or claws of cats and dogs is so difficult, and almost to the point where sometimes people take their cat or dog to the vet to get it done because you're risking bodily injury yourself or injury to the pet. That if there was a little pad or block that you could place the paw on that would have little holes where the nails would go into, and you just gently hold the paw there, and then something underneath either sanded them or cut them or crimped them off or did something so that you could do it the whole paw at once and just do 4 paws, but it would be easy and hopefully not traumatic for the animal. There's a lot that needs to go into there, and I'd have to go through some methodical thinking, but man, cutting those nails is just not fun.
I support that problem. My dog hates it. We hate it. We don't take him to the vet. He just runs around with sharp nails.
Okay, I can help you, Matt. I can help you.
All right. Well, I want you to design this thing that is going to make it simple, and every one of my kids can use it on them, on the dog. I mean.
Yes.
That's a wrap for today's episode. Huge thanks to our chair, Dr. Andra Blomkalns, for sharing her insight and experience. Clearly, we've only scratched the surface of biodesign in the innovation process. Keep tuning in for more on this topic in future episodes. For those listening, be sure to check out the show notes for links to Dr. Blomkalns' latest work and studies. If you liked today's episode, don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with a colleague. And as always, we want to hear from you. Send us your questions, ideas, or feedback at the link in the description. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next time. Until then, keep taking care of anyone, anything, at any time.